China Global Television Network.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi outlines the country's priority areas in its engagement with the international community. Rwandan President Paul Kagame and Tanzania's President John Magufuli agree to boost trade and security ties. And we celebrate the achievements of women in Africa as the world marks International Women's Day. And hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live, and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. In business, Zimbabwe denies allegations of fixing the exchange rate of its new currency. And why Kenya is contemplating a ban on plastic bottles amid pollution concerns. We start in Beijing, where Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has answered questions from the press at the 13th NPC's annual meeting. China's top diplomat discussed domestic policies, diplomatic relations with other world powers, and hotspot issues across the world.
While answering a question about Chinese telecom giant Huawei and its struggle against the US government, China's foreign minister made it clear that China will protect the legitimate interests of Chinese companies and individuals facing political persecution.
That the recent action against a particular Chinese company and individual is by no means a pure judicial case, but a deliberate political move to bring them down. We support the company and individual in question in seeking legal redress to protect their own interests and refusing to be victimized like silent lambs.
Wang then moved on to discuss China's trade relations with the US. This year marks the 40th anniversary of China and the US establishing diplomatic ties, and Wang said the two countries benefit from cooperation and lose when entangled in disputes.
如果一味放大竞争，就会挤压
Exaggerating our competition out of all proportion would squeeze our space of cooperation. The right attitude is to focus on expanding our cooperation. This is both in our mutual interest and what we owe to the world.
This year also marks the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between China and Russia. The two countries' leaders will exchange state visits in the coming month to commemorate their friendship and to seek further cooperation. Mega projects jointly built by the two states include a natural gas pipeline and 2 cross-border bridges. Wang Yi also said that China's Belt and Road Initiative and Russia's Eurasian Economic Union will continue to integrate.
When China and Russia stand together, the world will be a safer and a more peaceful and stable place.
A growing number of European countries are taking part or are considering to take part in China's Belt and Road Initiative, but according to European media, some still have reservations. For this, Wang Yi had this to say.
China hopes to have more dialogue with Europe to properly handle and manage the situation. In a world full of uncertainties, China and Europe are both for multilateralism and against unilateralism and protectionism. We have common views and concerns on these important issues.
In the coming weeks, President Xi will embark on this year's diplomatic trips, starting with China's European partners.
Well, CGTN's Uche Okoronkwo is joining us now from Beijing with the latest. Uche, the Chinese foreign minister has spoken widely about the country's engagement with the international community. What were the key highlights, would you say?
Well, thank you, Karen. And of course, today was quite a critical day because it's essentially the first time we're getting more insight into that draft foreign investment law that, of course, the NPC discussed on the floor today. One thing that came out of it is the law will be passed on the 15th. So one thing that came out of it was some of the expectations that investors have been looking to hear from the government on a foreign investment, on China and foreign investment going forward. Now, of course, it seemed like the focus this time around was on fairer competition, equal treatment for foreign investors in the country, transparency in their foreign investment policies, as well as protection of intellectual property and, of course, investor rights going forward. And some of the key points that came out of that NPC briefing today was the fact that the government would be interfering with technology transfer, which was one of the key issues. There'll be equal access to foreign and domestic capital going forward for foreign investors, equal treatment for foreign products for foreign investors, strengthening their protections in areas such as intellectual property rights, as well as profits and funds coming in and out of China going forward. And of course, building a service system, especially for foreign investors. But the key thing that did come out, Karen, was the fact that China's government is quite willing to open up its economy going forward, improve the business environment for foreign investors, of course, in light especially of the fact, in light of its accession at the World Trade Organization.
Uche, let's talk about the saga around Huawei and China-US relations. It was quite prominent, wasn't it, in Wang Yi's address? What more can you tell us about it?
Well, just to give the viewers a bit of an update, Huawei is actually seeking legal redress on the government's ban on the use of its telecommunications equipment across government agencies. And what we heard from Minister Wang Yi today basically was that firm support of Huawei's move to seek legal redress from the U.S. government. He said that Beijing is firmly behind protecting its people and its businesses going forward. And of course, he alluded to the fact that this was a deliberate attempt to bring a certain company down. So, of course, we're watching to see how that could impact talks currently going on with the U.S. Of course, that foreign investment law that we saw today did deal with some of the key issues that the U.S. had brought to the table. So I guess it's wait and see going forward, Karen.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was Uche Okorowankwo there for us in Beijing. Well, continuing with Huawei, it's taking the US government to court, as Uche was saying just there. The Chinese tech giant will challenge a law that would limit its ability to do business in the American market. CGTN's Jim Spellman explains.
Huawei is suing the U.S. government, claiming it has been unfairly banned from use in United States government networks. The U.S. has labeled Huawei a security risk and claims users of their equipment could be spied upon by the Chinese government. Huawei denies wrongdoing and says its systems are safe and secure. Rotating Huawei chairman Guo Ping claims the U.S. has hacked Huawei servers, emails, and source code, but has found no evidence of wrongdoing.
After exhausting all other means to allay the doubts of some U.S. lawmakers, we are left with no choice but to challenge the law in court.
The ban was passed by Congress in 2018 as part of a sprawling defense spending bill. It bars the U.S. government and contractors from purchasing equipment or services from 5 Chinese tech companies, including Huawei. The suit claims the law unfairly targets Huawei, violates the company's due process rights by denying the company a chance to defend itself, and claims the U.S. Congress overstepped its bounds when making the law.
It is effectively adjudicating on its own whether or not Huawei is in fact influenced and subject to the Chinese government, instead of allowing the executive and the courts to make that judgment, as the statute allows for all other companies.
The lawsuit could force the U.S. to produce evidence to back up its claims. It could also force Huawei to reveal more about its inner workings. U.S. Senator Marco Rubio, who supports the ban, tweeted, "Huawei is suing U.S. government? Good. Can't wait until discovery phase so world can see how they cheat, steal, and spy for government of China. But Huawei executives say they welcome oversight.
And at Huawei, we are very proud that we are the most open, most transparent organization in the world. And we allow our customers and their professional teams to come and audit and inspect and review everything that we do.
Last year, a judge threw out a similar suit filed by a Russian cybersecurity firm that was also banned in the U.S. The judge in that case ruled that protecting American computer networks outweighed damages done to private companies. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
Well, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has also spoken on China-Africa cooperation. The Chinese government's top diplomat has described the growth of Sino-Africa ties as a towering tree that no force can topple.
We will fully implement the 8 actions which were announced in the Beijing summit of FOCAC last year. By deeply and jointly implementing the One Belt and One Road initiative, we will build a community of common destiny for both sides. China-Africa cooperation has become more and more successful, which has also attracted some criticism. However, China and Africa trust each other, and the fruits of China-Africa cooperation have spread across the African continent. We have seen many African leaders and people of vision come forward to refute the so-called neocolonialism agenda. This shows that any false claim has no market in Africa. China-Africa cooperation has always been open. Africa's development also needs more input from the international community. China is ready to play a big role in Sino-Africa cooperation so as to attract more countries to pay attention to, attach importance to, and invest in Africa. We should also use our own strengths and work together for peace and development in Africa.
Well, joining me now from Johannesburg is Dr. David Monyae for more analysis of China-Africa cooperation. He's the co-director at the University of Johannesburg Confucius Institute. Thank you very much for joining us. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says China-Africa cooperation has grown into a towering tree. What would you say is the significance of this description?
It is one of the best descriptions, and as you are aware, we in Africa are much more familiar with trees, and we hope that tree is a bamboo tree that can live more than 500 years with deep roots, and that can provide shade and fruits for all and in a fair way. And there's no doubt that the relationship is deepening, going into more areas. And I think it is Africa that will also benefit, taking advantage of changes that are taking place within Chinese economy and tap into it for the benefit of Africa and the world. And therefore, I think there can never be any better description than the one the foreign minister has alluded to. And one is looking forward to see more work being done to broaden and access for African goods into China, and ensure that African continent benefits from new technologies that are being developed in China, and to have the Belt Road Initiative benefiting the continent, not just for the Chinese market, but within the global value chain, so that African goods can reach Europe, Eastern Europe and Russia using the alternative belt. To augment the current existing belts.
So you see it more as bamboo rather than a tree. What should African countries expect from this partnership going forward?
I think there's so much to expect. One is the lessons that China is providing in the manner in which the two session is set, how milestones are set and achieved, and the manner in which China is reforming its own economy. All this have so much for Africa in terms of practically changing the economy, gearing it for and entering into the fourth industrial revolution, And within that context, I think Africa would benefit in opening up the bottlenecks in the arena of infrastructure, intra-Africa trade, and ensure that there is a huge market for beneficiated African minerals into Chinese market and beyond.
Let's talk about the positioning of African countries. How do you think they should play a more active role in their relationship with China?
I think what is needed at the level of the African Union is to do a much more deeper research on the Agenda 2063 and to go beyond that in sectorial areas and identify which ones should be prioritized as we all Africans face China. For instance, a good example would be tourism. To what extent, what regulatory framework is needed on the African continent to allow more Chinese coming and benefiting from our rich resources, natural. We have animals, we have one of the best natural setting. We have a productive land on the African continent in the agriculture sector. And I think the future, as the world moves into 2050, there will be 9 billion people. And I think after China, Africa will be the biggest thing in the world. We need to learn as well as China learning from Africa. And therefore, I think more work needs to be done on the African continent and specifically at the nation-state level.
Okay, thank you very much for your analysis. That was Dr. David Monyai there joining me from Johannesburg on China-Africa cooperation. Well, we are going to a short break now. Don't go away, lots more to come, including Rwandan President Paul Kagame and Tanzania's President John Magufuli agreed to boost trade and security ties. And we celebrate the achievements of women in Africa as the world marks International Women's Day.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Rwandan President Paul Kagame and Tanzania's President John Magufuli have agreed to boost trade and security ties after talks in Dar es Salaam. President Kagame had travelled to Tanzania for a 2-day working visit. CGTN's Daniel Kijia has more from Dar es Salaam.
Jetting in for talks with Tanzanian President John Magufuli. On the agenda for Rwanda's President Paul Kagame's visit, improving bilateral ties in security and trade, and boosting integration for the East African region.
Tanzania and Rwanda are friends and relatives. Now from this we will build Africa, the whole of East Africa in general. So thank you, President Magufuli.
It's the latest step in attempts to boost ties between Tanzania and Rwanda. This is President Paul Kagame's 4th visit to Tanzania in the last 2 years, and the very first as the head of the East African community. Since 2015, President Magufuli's government has been looking to improve relations between the two countries. Among other things, he ordered the Tanzanian Port Authority to build an office in Kigali, Rwanda's capital, to facilitate trading logistics for the business community between these two countries. The two countries are constructing the Isaka-Kigali standard gauge railway, aimed at reducing logistics cost, boost trade, and ease of movement of people.
The main thing is economy, how to facilitate relations and trading between our two countries. The talks have gone well. The pending issues will be discussed and facilitated by ministers from both sides.
President Kagame's visit to Tanzania comes amid a diplomatic row between Rwanda and Uganda. But in their public pronouncements, the two presidents here insisted their talks focus instead on their own bilateral issues. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Zimbabwe has been trying hard to solve its mounting debt obligations, but calls are now being made for long-term solutions to ensure there's an economic turnaround in order to shield the vulnerable from the hardships being experienced. The government has put in place strategies to help clear debt, including a re-engagement process that aims to foster some understanding with the international community. The economy has been saddled with cash shortages, fuel price hikes, high inflation, a reduction in manufacturing and a slowdown on exports. By the end of August 2018, Zimbabwe's debt stood at over $17 billion. Domestic debt accounted for 54%, with the rest being external debt.
You don't just wake up in 6 months and pay them. From what? We also have to grow homegrown solutions to pay our debts, not to borrow to pay another debt.
Leaders from the African Great Lakes region are pushing for the voluntary repatriation of some refugees. It's seen as a lasting solution to the continent's refugee crisis. After 3 days of talks, regional ministers in charge of refugees agreed that as many as possible should be repatriated. They also called for better integration of refugees in host countries. According to the UN, 11 million people in the region have been uprooted from their homes due to conflict and insecurity. CGTN's Hilary Ayesika has been attending the meeting in Kampala, Uganda.
Leaders are gathered here in Kampala to try and find a solution to the refugee crisis in Africa. Uganda is one of several countries pushing for a voluntary return of refugees to their countries of origin.
In Uganda, we have now over 1 million refugees. To integrate all of them into Ugandan society is an uphill task. It may not be very possible. What we would pray is, can we create situations in the countries of origin that are conducive for return? That is the desire of this international conference that is taking place here.
However, leaders accept that those who cannot be repatriated need to be better integrated. And they are asking the donor community to commit more resources towards resettlement plans.
Yes, we continue to keep our open door policy, but the refugees place a big burden on the resources that are available. So the international community must shoulder its share of responsibility and accept that they must continue to support.
Uganda is home to more than 1 million refugees, largely from neighboring South Sudan, Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The leaders here believe if the proposals are adopted, they will help secure the rights and protection of refugees in Africa's Great Lakes region and ease the crisis. Hilary Ayesika, CGTN, Kampala.
Meanwhile, Ethiopia is appealing to the international community for $1.3 billion in order to cater for its 2019 humanitarian needs. The request, made in collaboration with the United Nations, seeks to support over 8 million people across the country. Coletta Wanjoe reports now from Addis Ababa.
Representatives of international donor communities and organizations, Ethiopia is asking for their support because the number of people who need humanitarian assistance in the country has increased from 7.9 million in 2018 to 8.3 million people this year.
The total resource required to address these 8.3 million food and non-food beneficiaries is estimated at $1.314 billion, of which $600 million is required for emergency food assistance. The remaining 714 million USD is for non-food component.
Ethiopia also hosts 900,000 refugees who mostly come from neighboring countries like South Sudan, Eritrea and Somalia. While the country may not have experienced its usual severe droughts in 2018, it suffered from regular internal conflicts which led to the displacement of over 3 million people. The United Nations says without urgent funding, life-saving operations will cease at the end of March.
Millions are still reeling from past year's droughts. Each year, we can additionally expect to have in excess of 2.5 million cases of moderate acute malnutrition and 300,000 cases of severe acute malnutrition. I cannot stress enough that this is not the time for business as usual.
This is the 20th humanitarian appeal that Ethiopia's Commissioner for Disaster Management, Mitiku Kasa, has made in the past years. He says the country seeks a durable solution.
Now it is time for the government, for humanitarian development partners, to move away from the dependency on humanitarian aid appeals, to invest in both humanitarian development intervention areas through multi-year strategic resilience plan in order to sustain livelihood and build the resilience of communities and nations.
In 2018, the international community mobilized nearly $600 million towards Ethiopia's disaster and humanitarian plans, while the Ethiopian government itself raised $342 million. While pledging its commitment to assist Ethiopia, the African Union is urging the state to ratify the Kampala Convention, a continental treaty that will assist Ethiopia easily mobilize support and solidarity from member states for victims of internal displacement. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
To South Africa now, and the Chinese Embassy and the African National Congress Women's League have co-hosted a reception to mark International Women's Day. That's March the 8th. It's a focal point in the movement for women's rights. The event took place at the Chinese Embassy in Pretoria. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
According to the Executive Directorate of UN Women, violence is the most challenging issue against women around the world, as progress in gender equality is often erratic and at times a bumbling contradiction. The Directorate continues to declare that after decades of pushing for equal rights, no one nation could call itself gender equal, with countries making advances in some areas, yet backsliding in others. South Africa is one of the countries struggling with the scourge of violence against women. This gathering at the Chinese Embassy in Pretoria is one of the events to be held in commemoration of the International Women's Day.
What is central and key to us is economy and development of women in South Africa. And we are grateful that we had received and appreciate the support from our women in China, All China Women's Federation. We are still saying to our sisters in China that we want to grow and grow big as women in South Africa.
China is ready to support the effort made by South Africa. All we can say, we are ready to work. We are ready like to work together with you to see this country, South Africa, to become a locomotive. And we love to see South Africa to be a pilot country. Let us join hands and work closely to build a more beautiful world for all the women, and the mankind.
The two leaders also noted that enhanced bilateral cooperation between South Africa and China would not only foster women's welfare in the two nations, but also be of great significance in promoting global gender equality. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
In Egypt, women have been stepping up to also participate in male-dominated fields. One inspirational woman, Yara Shalabi, took the challenge to enter one of the toughest and dangerous car racing experiences. In just a few years, she's formed the country's first desert rally women's team, which has won several national competitions. Here's Adel El-Makhrouti with more.
Car racing in Egypt is a male-dominant sport, and for the few women who have made it, they stood out in typical speed races and drifting competitions. When it comes to desert rallying, however, women's participation here are quite rare.
My family made me get used to the desert. Ever since I was a young girl, we would always go on safaris and road trips. We camped for several days. I have explored almost all desert regions in Egypt.
Six years ago, Yara got exposed to the magnificent world of desert rallies. Fascinated by maneuvering cars among mountains, rocks and sand dunes, she decided to buy a four-wheels drive vehicle and enter a race. She took on the challenge. Many women tried to engage in this exclusively men's world. No one went through their first race though.
Very few people supported us for some time. Some teams became jealous of us. They stopped assisting us and withdrew the support. But others would sacrifice the accessories they needed to help us race. My family has always believed in me. They wanted me to become a champion.
Her first race was in 2012. Like all those who tried before her, it turned out catastrophic. But what distincted her is that she never quit.
My first race was terrible. I spent 2 days trying to figure out the way. I almost missed the racetrack, even with the help of the organizers. But I finished the race more persistent. I practiced a lot. But with a more experienced co-pilot, by the next race, I came in second place against huge teams who have been racing for 10 to 15 years.
Since then, Yara joined all domestic desert races in Egypt, winning first place in several of them. By 2015, she started going international. Her dreams quickly got bigger. She created Gazelle, a racing team mostly dedicated to women. This resilient woman has created Egypt's first team whose navigators, mechanics and support crew are all women.
I have met very great women over the recent years. I never realized that they will be part of my team. I have encouraged them, and they have the potential and the gift. We have created a very good team, which has topped in the domestic championship.
This year, Gazelle is going to be the first women team in history to race in Saudi Arabia, as the kingdom allows women to drive. With every milestone, Yara's aspirations grow. She wants to become a world champion in this sport. Later, she'll plan for her legacy by creating a school for supporting young girls who fear to engage in challenging sports. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Heading now to Uganda, where we meet Aisha Bahati, who is not your average hairdresser. She's been blind since childhood, but that's not stopped her from styling hair. She's now passing on her skills to young women in the capital city of Kampala. Leon Esenyange reports.
Aisha Bahati easily weaves her fingers through a strand of hair. At 8 years old, she lost her eyesight when she was injected with an expired drug. Despite not being able to see, she took up hairstyling.
When I lost my sight, my mother bought me a doll. That's what I started with. And when I grew older, I knew what to do with hair. It's probably a talent I have.
Bahati has worked in the salon ever since. She has no trouble attracting customers. Her clients say she does a good job.
When she does my hair, it doesn't break, and she always has a different style for me every time I come here.
And when she is not working on a customer, Bahati is busy teaching several teenage girls a few hair designs. Bahati has been styling hair for close to a decade now and says she wants to continue serving her loyal customers, but she also wants to share her skills with other young women. And they are always pleased to learn from her.
She has taught me how to plait hair, how to make a wig, and how to plait these young kids, because I came here without knowing anything, and she taught me.
Bahati enjoys hairstyling, but her resilience has also kept her going. And she is also keen on fighting the stereotypes around disability.
Other women should learn from what I do. Those that don't have any disabilities should be encouraged to work. If I can, then why can't they?
Doctors say surgery could help Bahati regain her sight. Hopefully one day she'll be able to see her handiwork. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Chibuli, Central Uganda.
Amazing story there. To some developing news now in Finland. The Finnish government is stepping down after Prime Minister Juha Sipilä failed to this morning and is seeking his government to continue in a caretaker capacity until a new cabinet can be formed. Well, the government collapse comes 1 month before parliamentary elections, throwing Finland into political limbo. With a fast ageing population, the changes to the healthcare system were crucial to three-party governing coalition's plans to balance public finances. Well, we are going to a short break now. Don't go away, lots more to come, including Zimbabwe denies allegations of fixing the exchange rate of its new currency. And 2018 proves to have been a fruitful year for MTN's Nigeria's growth.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start off in Zimbabwe. The central bank has denied allegations of fixing the exchange rate of the new transitional currency. Well, the bank had earlier said that it would leave the market to decide the rate. The country ditched a discredit one-to-one dollar peg for dollar surrogate bond notes and electronic dollars. This led to the creation of a new currency called the RTGS dollar. Its value has been held at 2.5 to the US dollar since February the 22nd. Zimbabwe's economy has been crippled by a cash crunch, and plans to allow ordinary Zimbabweans to exchange bond notes and electronic dollars for US dollars at banks have yet to be implemented. Well, some African states have expressed their dissatisfaction with rating agencies, saying their conclusions are often undisputed and irrational. Governance bodies like the Africa Peer Review Mechanism are now calling for the establishment of a credit rating advisory and research bureau. Here's CGTN's Giram Chala reporting now from Yaoundé in Cameroon.
In simple terms, credit rating is an assessment of the credit worthiness of a borrower in general terms or with respect to a particular date or financial obligations. To get sovereign credit rating for borrowing purposes, for instance, African states currently go only to the three globally dominant credit rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's and Fitch. But there is a problem.
Countries are just rated and they don't have any power to contest or appeal the ratings. Though there is such provision, but the window is very, very weak. What we see is rating agencies just make assumptions which are very, very grave, and those assumptions are prejudicing African countries.
Apart from credit rating, Africa also has problems related with general economic governance, and the continent, through the heads of state assembly, has assigned the Africa Peer Review Mechanism to take the mandate of coming up with recommended ways of better economic governance in Africa.
We have been asked to monitor the implementation of Agenda 2063 and the SDGs 2030. If you would appreciate that within these frameworks there are specific aspects to do with economic governance and political governance. But we also have a mandate to support member states in their dealings with international credit rating agencies as a concern in order to explore how African governments can improve their access to global capital, affordable global capital.
Back to the specific issue of credit ratings, and here in Yaoundé on the sidelines of the African Union Finance and Monitoring and Economic Planning meeting, experts and analysts of the sector are now advising Africa to establish a bureau which would serve as a credit rating advice and research center.
He proposed to establish a research and advisory bureau. It's not a new institution which is going to be established to perform the work that is done by international credit rating agencies. What it sought to do is just to give countries support in the area of credit rating in Africa, which is in a way to get more involved in the credit rating process, which is quite a slacky area.
The general assessment on African states based on their credit ratings is good, but still experts suggest the continent needs to continue harnessing its potentials, including its natural resource and demographic dividend for an excellent economic growth and less pinching debt repayment strategies. Group Data CGTN, Yaoundé, Cameroon.
Uganda's government has issued a travel advisory to the business community on the movement of goods into Rwanda. Last week, Rwanda blocked its borders to products from Uganda, a move that strained relations between the neighbours. According to the Ugandan Prime Minister, talks are underway between the two countries to resolve the tensions. CGTN's Michael Beleke has more on that story.
Uganda's trade minister is advising trucks carrying cargo from Uganda to enter Rwanda via the Mirama Hills and Chanika border crossings. Delivery vehicles heading to the DR Congo have been encouraged to use the exit points between Uganda and the DR Congo. Normally, cargo trucks heading to the DR Congo town of Goma prefer going through Rwanda as opposed to the longer route through western Uganda. The Prime Minister of Uganda has told Parliament that the two governments are in contact with a view to resolve the impasse.
Government will give a report to this August House on what this situation is and how it has been finally resolved.
This week, Parliament tasked the government to explain the standoff with Rwanda. Legislators argued that while Rwanda has given its reasons for the border closure, Uganda remains tongue-tied.
This is a matter of life and death. The moment there is an escalation between the two sides, you don't know what is going to happen to your citizens, and the government is just hiding its head.
Hundreds of cargo trucks remain stranded at Uganda's border crossing with Rwanda. Many are from Uganda. Others originated from Kenya's port of Mombasa en route to Rwanda, Burundi, the DR Congo, and Tanzania. This area in downtown Kampala is often congested with trucks delivering grains and cereals from Rwanda. But business has slowed down in the last 1 week, with many dealers here counting losses. Fred Mwesgwa deals in beans, but he says prices are being pushed up as supplies run low.
We get a lot of tonnages from there, like 20 trucks per week. They are coming from Rwanda, Kampala. And the means they are taking a lot of trucks to Rwanda, like 50 trucks per week. Yes. No business. All that is at standstill.
Amid the frustration and uncertainty, the Ugandan government is urging the business community to keep calm as tensions are addressed. And while commerce is at the heart of the dispute, the Ugandan trade minister stressed the free movement of Ugandans to and from Rwanda remains unrestricted. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Figures from MTN Group's 2018 full-year investor presentation show the company may have joined the ranks of firms with over $2.7 billion in revenue in Nigeria. Revenue in Nigeria rose from $2.4 billion in 2017 to $2.8 billion in 2018, an increase of 17.1% year-on-year. Operations in the West African nation also accounted for 28.2% of revenue made by the group. MTN Nigeria, which may be listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange by the second quarter of 2019, saw growth across all segments. Voice revenue rose by 18.7%, while data revenue jumped 40.1%. Data traffic also increased by 56.3%. For many African nations, tourism is expected to be a major driver of income and development in the coming years. They're showing off what they have to offer at a major international tourism fair in Germany. But challenges remain, including developing infrastructure and overcoming security concerns. Ira Spitzer reports now from Berlin.
More than 180 countries, each trying to paint themselves as the perfect holiday destination. Berlin's massive ITB Travel Expo is a mecca for the multi-trillion-dollar global tourist industry. For the African nations here, it's an opportunity.
Tourism is very important to Kenya's economy. It creates jobs. It's 9% of the job creation. It's also now jumped from 10% to 14% of the GDP.
Kenya welcomed a record 2 million international tourists last year after seeing numbers plummet due to terror attacks several years ago. Overall, Africa hosted 58 million tourists, 5% of the global market, led by South Africa and Morocco.
From pristine beaches to cultural experiences, like seeing the centuries-old tradition of East Africa's Maasai people up close, the continent has no shortage of the things that international tourists are looking for.
But security is still a concern. More than 20 people died in a terror attack in Nairobi in January, and several countries are dealing with internal conflicts. Infrastructure is another issue, with connections more difficult than many other travel destinations. Western and Central Africa in particular have struggled to attract tourists, but the potential is clearly there.
Africa is certainly one of our trendy travel destinations at the moment. It's very popular in Germany. Most people begin with South Africa.
She says that after that first visit, her guests usually want to see more of Africa. The tour operators here hope visitors to the fair feel the same way and are ready to experience the real thing. Ira Spitzer, CGTN, Berlin.
We're going to a short break. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including why Kenya is contemplating a ban on plastic bottles amid pollution concerns.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
To environmental matters now. There's been a growing concern over the impact of plastic pollution across the world. A number of major corporates in the bottling products sector are now channeling funds into a recycling initiative in Kenya. The country imposed a tough ban on plastic bags in 2017, and officials are now considering a plastic bottle ban as well. Take a look.
Awash with plastic bottles and lacking a law, Kenya struggles to recycle. Many multinationals are scrambling to support recycling initiatives, stung by criticism from environmentalists over pollution. Single-use plastic will be a key topic at the next United Nations Environmental Program Summit in Nairobi, but developing nations such as Kenya don't have organized waste collection systems. Discarded plastic bottles can often be seen along the tree-lined velvet lawns of Nairobi's diplomatic district, floating through open drains and rivers. Despite lacking legal backing, companies still have hope that they can be proactive in safeguarding the environment.
Corporates and industries will
go for voluntary commitments. However, we feel that governments need to put rules, regulations, legally binding, so there is a way to continue looking and monitor what the industry does.
Officials have not yet organized recycling points. This has left ragged gangs to sift through mountains of pungent garbage at landfills. The country largely relies on private initiatives, but in most cases, the funds are a fraction of what's needed.
We need about, I would say about 360,000 US dollars, equivalent about 36 million Kenya shillings, to be able to adequately collect and recycle the 5,900 tons. Yeah. And of course, that excludes all other administrative and other fees, but that is what we need as core budget to be able to actualize that volume. And remember, every year our volume targets, it goes up. So what we need this year is not what we'll need next year or the year after.
Gachungi says Petco needs about $1 million this year if it also funds a campaign to increase recycling, money it doesn't have. She says the funds come from grants from big brands and a $25 levy on each ton of virgin plastic resin imported by members. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Let's now turn to North Africa. At an eco-lodge in a desert town northwest of Cairo, a dozen Egyptian novelists like to gather for some quality time with some professional input. Apart from escaping the chaos of living in a modern city, they get valuable support on how to overcome creative blocks.
Founded in 2017, a three-day getaway was formed by novelist Huda Anwar. She found her own writing motivation in nature.
I understood the value of the effect of places on writing from my trips. My travels to the mountains and to places that have no artificial aspects have whatsoever had an effect on me. This has made me realize the effect that such places would have had on other people.
No conditions are needed for one to attend the retreat except a passion for writing. The program aims to give authors the courage and confidence to express themselves without fear of criticism.
I love writing. I do not like reading, but I like writing and expressing what is inside of me. This is beneficial for me because I want to bring to others what is inside of me. It is exciting to me.
I came because of the writer's block which Huda was talking about. I feel that the place is encouraging. It's the first time for me in Wadi El Natron, so I was very excited about the place.
At the retreat, the writers come together to share their personal experiences and engage in group as well as individual readings. Therapeutic in nature, they are equipped with the means of fighting life pressures in order to continue writing.
This is why we are doing the Writers' Retreat. The writing retreat tackles the psychological and life challenges that a writer may face. Every amateur, mid-level or professional writer always faces psychological and life problems that affect their writing.
12 previous retreats have taken place in different areas across Egypt. Almost 100 writers have been involved since the program started. Some have even formed a club which provides support to help publish new members. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Further afield, UK-based pianist Rebecca Omodia is bringing African music to modern audiences. The classical musician directed and performed at the first ever African concert series in London's October Gallery. This recital was designed to bring works by Nigerian and Ghanaian composers to a wider audience. CGTN's Brian Toussaint brings us more.
Rebecca Omodia is a classically trained pianist, half Nigerian and half Romanian. She is part of a younger generation of performers rediscovering African art music. This genre blends traditional African elements into classical Western music.
This evening I'm playing music by Nigerian composer Ayo Bankole,
who was one of the most prolific composers from Nigeria. He derives from the Yoruba tribe, and his music is characterized by traditional Yoruba folk tunes.
The first wave of African composers attended music colleges in the UK over a century ago. Their composition style was born out of necessity. Solemn hymns brought over by missionaries lacked appeal on the African continent.
The church, who wanted actually during the campaign of evangelization, they found a big obstacle. People were not very keen or didn't like the Christian hymns. So that's why they approached the aforementioned names in order to indigenize those hymns. And that's the beginning of that movement, African Art Series.
I'm a huge fan of Fela Showande's work. So I normally tell people that there's Fela before Fela, you know, and the fact that his pedigree was sort of was represented here today in terms of the interpretation of his music was incredibly stimulating this evening.
These Nigerian and Ghanaian composers remain largely unknown to mainstream audiences, but their work has piqued the interest of modern musicians like Omordia. Last year, the UK-based pianist released her album, Ikele, piano music by African composers. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
A quick look at the sports news now. We begin with football news. English Premier League side Arsenal suffered a shocking 3-1 away defeat to Rennes on Thursday.